Hey everybody, Brenda Crouch here. I'm joining you today in Sedona, Arizona. And I know I say a lot of places are my favorite, but I'm going to tell you this is one of my top 3 favorite places on the earth. It is called the Painted Desert for a reason, as you can see behind me. And this right over here is Bell Rock behind me. I'm just really happy to be here in this area. It's a little chilly, but the weather's perfect because it's sunny Arizona. And on this road trip that my husband and I are taking, we were able to stop just a couple days ago in a little town that is now a ghost town and kind of a tourist attraction called Oatman. And this is all off of the old Route 66, Highway 66. And as we were driving through there, it just looked a lot like the movie Cars and just everything you would imagine, the windy little roads through the mountains. And as we came into this little town, it was just magical. They had all the wild burros that were just in the streets. You could feed the wild donkeys and kind of walk through the little gift shops. And we stopped into a little cafe, and the cafe was called Olive's Cafe in the town of Oatman. And I asked about, well, who is Olive? Tell me about her. And so the owner proceeded to tell us the story, a very compelling story about this young girl, and her name was Olive Oatman, and that became her town. And there was a book that was written about her because she had been captured by the Yavapai Indians when she was on a westbound wagon wheel trail with her family back in the early 1800s, and they had made it all the way from Pennsylvania to this area, and they were almost to the West Coast. They had heard about the gold mining and all the opportunity, but they really were coming for more religious purposes. They were kind of looking for their promised land. And at that time, they were overtaken by the Yavapai Indians or Yavapai Indians, and everyone in her family was actually very brutally murdered. And there was a lot of conflicts and a lot of contention, between the whites and the Indians. Some tribes were probably a little bit more brutal than others. And so, every culture and every tribe has their different perspectives on things, and I'm sure that they did even then. So I picked up a book in the bookstore, and I've been reading this book called The Blue Tattoo, and it's the story about Olive Oatman, and it's written by Margot Mifflin. It's an amazing book so far. I'm not finished with the book yet, but it's very compelling, her story. And the reason it's called The Blue Tattoo is she was eventually adopted by the Mojave tribe, who then raised her as their own, and they tattooed her chin. I don't know if you can see this, but they tattooed her chin with their markings. It was kind of like the family crest. And so she was really owned by the Mojave tribe, and they treated her a lot more humanely. She was abused and treated as a slave by the Yavapais, and she and her sister that were taken as the rest of her family was killed, and her sister ended up dying from starvation and abuse. But Olive was a stronger one, and she survived somehow. And then eventually, during a time of war, when they were in need of necessities, they traded her back to the white men for blankets and horses and beads. And at that point in time, Olive then was kind of reintegrated back into the white culture. What a story this girl had. And, as I'm just so passionate, as you know, about the issue of identity, and I was thinking about how this girl survived so much trauma, and at a time in life when you didn't have the internet, you didn't have Yelp, and you didn't have things to a GPS or anything to tell you what the weather conditions or the safety conditions would be on the road. You were just out in this open terrain of the Wild West, and you were really risking everything to try to get to your promise and your dream. And I think about how that in our culture, we don't have the same kinds of challenges, and yet we face different kinds of challenges now. We face, we're in a culture now where human beings are getting along. We're much more civilized and we don't have the same types of wars that we used to, but it's really taken on a new form because there's still tension between people who have differences. And when I think about this girl and how she survived it from one party, one tribe to another, and then back reintegrated into her own people again, but she still bore the mark of the Mojaves, and how that they absolutely owned her identity for a while. And then as she left their tribe and then re-entered the white culture, she became actually a public speaker who would then tell about her story and give inspiration to other people. There was a lot of speculation about her because of the years of slavery. And so I'm sure that her story inspired so many who were curious, who were maybe afraid. And I think about the bravery and the courage of this girl to bear the mark and yet still come out of what we would call a fiery situation, a trial and a challenge, and to have become this cumulative person who became who she was because of what she'd been through. And so she bore the mark of an identity of a tribe, and yet she had her own special and unique identity all to herself. And, today we might think about some of the traumas that people face as young children. She was 14 years old when this happened to her. And it would be years before she would be reintegrated back into the white culture. And if you think about how we could really relate today, I think about people who are human trafficked, children that are abused, children who have no choice in the matter, in the things that are done to them often, and the things that even within sometimes their own families. Family systems can be often cruel. They're not always the loving, wonderful homes that so many of us were privileged to have. And, even for myself, I was privileged to have love, and I was privileged to have a mama that taught me about Jesus. But I also had some of the things that, the abuses that affected me and my identity as a very little girl at 8 years old, because of some of the brokenness within my own father and the abuses that he went through. It's part of the human condition to often suffer. And some of the traumas that we go through will leave us feeling like we're out in the Wild West and in this open terrain, left having to fend for ourselves, having to figure out how to survive. And so often we will create coping mechanisms and, make inner vows to tell ourselves how we're not going to ever be treated a certain way again. And I have to wonder, through the ages, all of the accounts that only God knows and only God sees of people who have suffered. But it's the ones who have a certain mindset that decide they're going to come out of it better and not bitter that survive. And I wonder, is that you today? Have you been through things that have nearly killed you? Have you been through things that have tried to take your identity? They've left their mark on you, so to speak. And you feel like, I feel like everybody can see this thing on me that I know is there, the past and the scars that I've been through, the things that have marked my life. I wonder if you could maybe see yourself through the eyes of God, your Creator, the one who created all of this beauty, and yet the most beautiful thing that He created was you and me. Could you see yourself, maybe not for the marks that have been left upon you by your scars, by all the wounds and all the things that have tried to seize you and hijack you and steal from you, but could you see yourself as someone who God preserved, someone who God pulled out of the wreckage, someone who God delivered, and someone who God loves, and God made strong, and God made capable to have the courage and the foresight and the insight to dream again? Could you maybe decide that it is the God of wonders whose great mysteries are unfolding in your life today that will bring you to full and total and complete restoration and bring you full circle to where you can look back on the trail and you can be thankful because of all that collectively made you so uniquely and so beautifully you. Thank you so much for tuning in to my podcast. We're going to continue to grow together, and we're going to delve into some deep subjects as the weeks progress. And I just am so thankful that you have chosen to join me here. And I'm asking you to tell all of your friends about my podcast and continue to join me as we continue to dive into different perspectives about our wonderful, wonderful God and this wonderful life and being a human that He created you and I to be. Have a blessed day.